Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Week Old Beans, episode 26. I am Ardot and I'm here with my host Fowler. Um, we've got a we're going to cover the news today and then we're going to talk about a topic that we hope we're going to address with as much sensitivity and tact as it deserves. But Fowler, why don't you go ahead and run us through this week's news? It's been both boring and non-boring. So tell the people what's been happening.
Well, to begin with, George Santos, the serial liar and criminal, has been expelled from Congress. I don't believe in our lifetimes we've seen someone be expelled from Congress. It's pretty rare. The main time that happened is all the pro-Confederate congressmen that got yeeted back in the day. But
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure at some point somebody probably has been expelled, but
I don't know if it's been in our lifetime. It's been a while. Like
yeah,
you have to really fuck up in order to like Joseph McCarthy accused the military of being secret communists and he was only censored, not expelled. So I think you really have to you have to fuck up to such a degree, you know.
yeah, you got to go sicko mode for real if you want to get kicked out of Congress. They're probably
Santos, we've talked about him before in the podcast, but he is a chronic liar. He lied about being Jewish. He lied about his mother dying from COVID and also 9/11. He lied about all the schools he went to. He lied about where he worked. He claimed he worked for Goldman Sachs. He's wanted in Brazil for doing like cons, and also he, while in Congress, was stealing money from his donors, and he used that money for Botox and OnlyFans and like Sephora. So he's almost a charming return to form instead of him being like a fascist or some sort of ideologue who wants to achieve bad things for America. He's just a greedy piece of shit who steals from people in order to pay for his like creature comforts basically. But
yeah,
he's been expelled.
yeah.
He is
It's
losing his shit. He is claiming that like different congressmen are insider trading. He's claiming that one of the congressmen is a wife beater. Like he's really going all out. But because he's George Santos and he lies about literally everything, we cannot trust him. So him outing these people is not. I don't think it matters.
yeah, it's like the he's doing his war charge. He's doing his his 300 moment where he goes out screaming to fight Xerxes and taking the boys with him, or in this case, the thousands of dollars he stole from people to pay for OnlyFans and Botox. Very harmless things. Uh, so yeah, so he's gone, and he has been creating a. I mean, Santos like has just been he's the so I guess his expulsion basically means that the Republicans are down a man in the House, and the Republicans are holding the House by a very, 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 very slim majority.
I
Um,
think it's either 3 seats or 4 seats.
yeah, so they're down possibly to 2 or 3 seats, um, which I think is one of the reasons why they were hesitant to expel him before. Speaker Mike Johnson, he was asked about it before the expulsion, and he basically said that he encouraged people to vote their conscience, but that he was hesitant to do anything. And I think this is a ploy. I think he's saying this because he knows the Republicans would be down a seat. But that, technically George Santos is not being convicted of any sort of crime. All of the things that have happened are ongoing lawsuits and accusations. Incredibly credible and proven accusations, but um, I don't think there's been any like substantial, hardcore like charges pressed against him for any of these things. Although I'm sure now that he's out of Congress, there will be several. Because like they've kind of thrown him to the wolves because he doesn't have the protection of his office behind him anymore. Uh, but so yeah, I mean, bye bye birdie, I guess. I mean, there's really not much analysis to cover. I mean, we talked about it, Fowler and I, and like there's not much substantial analysis of him that we can give because he's just a chronic piece of shit and a liar.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see the limits of magadom. Like, there's all these think pieces during the Trump era of like when will he go too far, and I think we're seeing with Matt Gaetz, who has like a 20% approval rating in Florida, and George Santos being expelled. Like there is a limit. You can be a quasi fascist, and you can race bait, and you can fearmonger, but stealing from your donors and doing overt federal crimes, that'll shut your ass down, and also like destroying the federal government by killing a speaker and driving the entire party into chaos for weeks and weeks also seems to
Yeah.
be the
Well,
voters are not playing.
we were talking about yesterday the dysfunction of the Republican Party, the current GOP. I think the Democratic Party is also dysfunctional, especially since the Israel Palestine shit. That's really caused a wedge between a lot of Democrats. But I didn't even mention to you, Fowler, about Tommy Tuberville. I was talking about Matt Gaetz being crazy, people being pissed off at Mike Johnson, George Santos. I completely forgot that Tommy Tuberville is currently holding up the U.S. military and refusing to allow like 135 military appointments that need to be made over the military's abortion policy, which is that basically they said you can have an abortion and like be okay. And that's currently
We'll, we'll
causing.
see if we'll see if Tuberville has the same problem Gates is having, where he's created enough dysfunction that the voters will eject him.
Well, he's. I don't want to. I don't want to impugn my followers. I was going to make a comment about the state that he's from and whether or not that's going to happen, but.
I don't know. I mean, Matt Gates is from the fucking Florida Panhandle. He is as rustic as they
Yeah,
come,
well,
but
Tommy
he
Tuberville was the former football coach um, from Alabama, so that's his. Those were his qualifications going into office. Was that he was a football coach?
not to. No, I feel like I feel like you're salty about Alabama for unrelated
Shut the
reasons
fuck up!
too.
Shut the fuck up! Shut the fuck up! Don't even bring that shit. Shut the fuck. For those of y'all who don't know, I'm a little bit salty because there was a football team that was beaten by Alabama last night, and I'm a little bit pissed off about it. But we're not going to talk about that. We're not here to discuss that. I'm not going to dox myself, although if you look at the date of this and then go check SEC schedule, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But um, no, Tommy Tuberville is he's actively hindering the U.S. military from functioning properly, um, and which is causing the Republican, like the Republicans, which have billed themselves as the party of pro-military. It's really not helping that one of their members is effectively fucking over the military. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on with the GOP. Maybe Santos. I feel like it's desperation at this point. Um, it's just there's like 7 of their members who are currently all engaged in various levels of tomfoolery. Uh, with for no like coordinated, like with no coordinated purpose. We got one, Matt Gaetz trying to topple the federal government, Tommy Tuberville fucking over the military, George Santos being weird, Lauren Boebert jacking people off at a Beetlejuice concert, Marjorie Taylor Greene writing books that are failing, and then Mike Johnson being Mike Johnson. And, looking at his son's porn uh, capacity. It's all in all, it's just there's a lot happening. A lot
To
of
be
different
fair to
players.
Speaker Johnson, apparently his son can also look at his porn consumption,
Yeah,
so
that
it
doesn't
is a
make it
two-way
better,
street.
to be honest. That doesn't improve. That offers no improvement whatsoever to the situation. So that's the GOP. So we'll get back to our regularly scheduled programming after we talk about something unrelated because I feel like uh, like there is no like substantial analysis that can be given to the George Santos situation besides damn that's crazy.
Yeah, I think we can move on to the next topic if you're down for that.
Yeah, I'm down for that because this is going to take up most of the podcast. But so I posted. Oh, those of y'all watching, go check out the video that I posted about economic growth. It's my first attempt at a video essay. Ignore the shitty thumbnail. I'm not a Photoshop guru. I'm really good at editing, but I'm not a Photoshop, and I don't have a very good relationship. So the thumbnail leaves much to be desired. But if y'all would go check that out, I'd really appreciate it. So I was thinking of doing this as a separate video, and then I thought to myself, this seems like something that's more conversational. It involves history. As you know, my current obsession is history, specifically U.S. history. So I'm allowing my uh, autist brain to focus on that and see if I can discover any interesting nuggets that could be useful for the podcast and for future content. But um, you know, I I think it's really worth discussing because I feel like this is not something that's ever going to go away, or at the very least, it's something that as America becomes more polarized and as radical politics becomes more normalized, that this topic's going to be something that is going to just kind of be open to discussion. It's going to enter public discourse, and I think it's a discussion that is worth engaging with. I think as I said, and I think our last podcast, the problem with liberalism is that or at least the problem with modern liberalism is that liberals oftentimes don't even want to learn how to challenge or defend their own viewpoints because their viewpoints are so embedded within the framework of our modern society, um, and that they don't feel any use in actually exploring topics that are contrary to that and dissecting topics that are contrary to that. And I think this is one of those topics that does need to be engaged with in some way and is kind of interesting to talk about because there's a lot of historical nuggets that we can pick at and nibble on. But um, I'm going to let Fowler introduce the topic and then I'll continue from there because it's gonna be my show, probably because I know more about this than Fowler does.
Yeah. So there's this article that we were reading about a prominent American politician who was worried about basically the immigrants integrating into America. And he talked about basically like those immigrants not holding the same values, those immigrants not like joining society and becoming American, and what a problem that is on an existential level of a country that that is not like whole basically, and that is just a bunch of little countries of different people who don't like cohabitate. And the thing that might surprise people is this was written by Benjamin Franklin about the Germans, not the Irish
Let
or
me
the
read it
Jews.
real quick. Let me actually read it. I got it pulled up because I think if we read it, since we this is an audio format, it might illuminate a little bit. I'm not going to read the full thing. I'm going to read the relevant portion. Um, so this is Benjamin Franklin. He's writing to Peter Collinson. Um, uh, let me find the year. 1755. So this was written 2 years before 1755. Those who come hither are generally of the most those who come hither are generally of the most ignorant, stupid sort of their own nation. So what he's basically saying is they're not sending their best. That's literally what he's saying in the opening in the opening of this letter to Peter Collinson. And his ignorance is often attended with credulity when knavery would mislead it, and with suspicion when honesty would set it right. And as few of the English understand the German language, and so cannot address them either from the press or pulpit. So basically saying, hey, these people don't speak English, so we can't communicate. Press meaning, like media, and then pulpit, religious, like a, social slash religious. 'Tis almost impossible to remove any prejudices they once entertain. Their own clergy have very little influence over the people, who seem to take an uncommon pleasure in abusing and discharging the minister on every trivial occasion. Not being used to liberty, they know not how to make a modest use of it, and as Colvin says of the young, and I'm not going to say this word because it is kind of a racial slur. Just he's referencing what I believe are uh, uh, people of African descent. So basically saying, just like the black people we have here, the Germans are also not used to liberty, that they are not esteemed men till they have shown their manhood by beating their mothers. So these seem to think themselves not free till they can feel their liberty in abusing and insulting their teachers. Thus they are under no restraint of ecclesiastical government. They they behave, however, submissively enough at present to the civil government, which I wish they may continue to do. For I remember when they modestly declined intermeddling in our elections, but now they come in droves and carry all before them, except in 1 or 2 counties. Few of their children in the country learn English. They import many books from Germany, and of the 6 printing houses in the province, 2 are entirely German, 2 German, half English, and but 2 entirely English. They have 1 German newspaper and 1 half German. Advertisements intended to be general are now printed in Dutch and English. The signs in our streets have inscriptions in both languages, and in some places only German. They begin of late to make all their bonds and other legal writings in their own language, which, though I think it ought not to be, are allowed good in our courts, where the German business so increases that there is continual need of interpreters, and I suppose in a few years they will be also necessary in the Assembly to tell one half of our legislators what the other half say. In short, unless the stream of their importation could be turned from this to other colonies, as you very judiciously propose, they will so soon outnumber us that all of the advantages we have will not, in my opinion, be able to preserve our language, and even our government will become precarious. So I'm going to stop here because it keeps going on and on. He talks about the French and how the French are also integrating these Germans into their own settlements, because you have to remember this was 1755. The extent of American territory was the 13 colonies. The French were settled out west, and then Spanish New Spain was so pretty much all the way from Mexico almost up to Canada. Huge portion of that territory was also Spanish. Um, so I just you know if you have any interest in U.S. history, this is really interesting. It's really really interesting how similar um, the similar thoughts and feelings that Benjamin Franklin had about German and to an extent Dutch and Eastern Europeans. I think, more so the Germans, but also he speaks of Dutch and Eastern European people moving to the United States during this time period. And, he talks about, obviously the interpreters, that they don't speak English, so, we're going to have interpreters in courts. There is talks about how you go to certain towns and, oh man, it's these once flourishing English towns, they have German printed on the signs, and they have in some cases Dutch in the newspapers and German in the newspapers, and it's just all so eerily similar. They're bringing their ignorance and their stupidity from their home country and infecting the United States. It's essentially what he says at one point, that they have their prejudices from their old country and they're importing it here, and it's making it an unviable situation. Now, I don't know if many people know the history of German America. German Americans are, I think, I looked at the numbers, and they are slightly more than Americans of English descent. So it kind of goes German Americans, English Americans, then you have the Irish and the Italian. Um, so right now in the United States, Americans of English and Scots Irish descent are a minority, um, like a sizable minority even within uh, Americans of European descent. The European ancestry of the average American is mostly German, Italian, and Irish, with English being spread out across the United States, and being found heavily up north, uh, and also down south. But the history of German America is really interesting, in large part because German Americans were forced to sort of fully integrate and Americanize because of World War One. They wanted to avoid the persecution that came when America was fighting against the Germans, or the Germans during World War One, and then of course World War Two didn't help, you know, because Germany was wilding out during that time. But uh, there's a lot of academic discussion about how German Americans are sort of like they just disappeared from um, sort of American public consciousness, because they integrated. They changed their name, stopped speaking German. Donald Trump's father and his grandfather told people they were from Sweden. Um, the Trump family is of German heritage, but Donald Trump's father was very deliberate in trying to plant the idea that his family was of Swedish origin. Um, because his father was doing business during World War I and didn't want to. He had many Jewish patrons, and he did not want to lose that business by revealing himself to be of German heritage. You know, I think Donald Trump's father was second generation. I don't think his father was born in Germany, but Donald Trump's grandfather was a German immigrant to the United States. So it's funny because Donald Trump's own family, went through this process of having to hide their ancestry due to fears of discrimination. So laying that out, what are your thoughts about this? And we can get maybe to the broader point that we're both trying to make, because there is a broader point to this.
I think it's interesting, like you said, that people move um, like that the same sort of bugaboos exist over and over again in different time periods. Like the fear of the outsider entering society and corrupting it is just such an ancient idea. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It exists in every single facet. I mean, I was thinking the other day, it's currently existing in Europe, and I think Europe is going to have a harder time with, you know, the sort of multi-ethnic, multicultural society that it looks like it's gearing up to try and deal with, because they don't have a history of that. America does. So I think, we've been lucky in that we have not had a lot of Donald Trump inflamed a lot of tensions that were always there, but we have always had those tensions, yet our democracy has powered through despite that. Um, Despite the tensions between, up north, the Italians, the Irish, down south, obviously, Black Americans and white Americans, out west, you have the Chinese Americans, Asian Americans in California, and then, of course, Native Americans in the Midwest and the South and other places, these constant pushes. And then, of course, Puerto Rico. I think a lot of people forget about Puerto Rico, but Puerto Ricans are American citizens. Um, these pushes and pulls that have always happened. I mean, I think a really good example is obviously, I sent you information about the Louisiana Creole population, which I can briefly give a history of. The Louisiana Creole people are essentially of Spanish, French, Native American, and African ancestry. It's when America purchased Louisiana and that territory, it had already been developed into a thriving sort of multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural center of commerce, because obviously Louisiana was both a French and Spanish territory. And then eventually it was purchased by the United States. And, what's really interesting about the French, the sort of Louisiana French Creole culture is that when America um, invaded. I mean, federal troops went into Louisiana. They established a rigid racial binary in a society that had never before had to deal with that sort of thing. I mean, if you looked, if you were of, mixed Native American, French, and African descent in Louisiana, I mean, you had significant rights. And there's actually, I was, reading accounts of when federal troops marched into Louisiana, they found that many of the plantation owners, many of the richest, were. I mean, I'm going to say this just to speak broadly, but people of color, non-white people, and they were, and of course the non-white plantation owners were like, what the fuck, because they were essentially told, hey, we're going to operate based on a racist system of black and white, and because you are black, you now are no longer able to hold um, your status, and you are now inferior. You're now a second class citizen. And so these very wealthy, esteemed, educated plantation owners went from um, they were placed in a system that they had never beforehand had to deal with, because obviously, in the way that race was considered in French Louisiana and Spanish Louisiana was very different. It was fluid. It was um, obviously it mattered to an extent, your ethnicity, but the restrictions were not there. You could, be a black woman, quote unquote, I'm putting black in air quotes because black is subjective, but you could be a black woman, and it was advantageous for you to marry a rich, wealthy Frenchman, and you were afforded, essentially the same status as any other wife would be. Um, so yeah, like it's like you said, Fowler, like it's really interesting to see how these boogeymen have always existed, and it begs the question, okay, well, if it seems like we've been having the same conversations with different groups of people, first being the Germans, and then of course, in the 1950s and early 1900s, it was what the Italians and the Irish up north. Um, it was the Irish and the Italians up north. Um, it begs the question, like when we talk about demographic change, like Benjamin Franklin didn't believe that anybody besides the English were white. He didn't believe that Germans, Eastern Europeans, Jews, you know, he believed that and I'm going to read it actually. I'm going to read exactly what he said. Um, this is a section from a letter that he wrote to, or I'm sorry, not a letter. This is from observing concerning the increasing of mankind, peopling of countries. Um, it's an essay that he wrote in 1755, so about 2 years after the first, about 2 years after the first little letter that we wrote. Um, so this is him basically laying out flat what he thinks of as white, quote unquote. Um, and he basically says, let me find the section. Okay, which this is the end of it, because I'm not going to read the full thing because it's kind of long. Which leads me to add one remark, that the number of purely white people in the world is proportionally very small. All Africa is black or tawny. Asia is chiefly tawny. America, exclusive of the newcomers, wholly so. And in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes are generally of what we would call the swarthy complexion, as are the Germans also, the Saxons only excepted, who with the English make the principal body of white people on the face of this earth. I could wish their numbers were increased, and while we are, as I may call it, scouring our planet by clearing America of woods, and so making this side of our globe reflect a brighter light to the eyes of inhabitants in Mars or Venus, why should we, in the sight of superior beings, darken its people? Why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America, where we have so fair an opportunity, by excluding all blacks and tawnies, of increasing the lovely white and red? But perhaps I am partial to the complexion of my country, for such kind of partiality is natural to mankind. So this is Benjamin Franklin saying, English people, Anglo-Saxons, um, of whose ancestry I am also of, although I would not be included in this description despite that, uh, um, are the only white people. So if we're going to go off of Benjamin Franklin's definition, which of course people who are against demographic, who sort of who use the fear of a browning America, they're not going by Benjamin Franklin's definition. Like they're not, if you were to ask anybody, and who has anxiety about demographic change, hey, like, what's your definition of white? They would give at this point, because we've amalgamated, like what it means to be white, they would just say, like, anybody who, like, has straight hair and, like, light skin. Like, that's what they would say. Like, because we've
The
included,
the concerns about immigrants or foreigners are the same. Who is a foreigner
yeah, who
changes. That's the
exactly,
thing that
exactly, who is considered a foreigner changes depending on context. And, you know, there's a really interesting article from The Atlantic where they basically talk about how the current way that we discuss demographic change is dangerous. And it's dangerous because it presents a set of what are supposed to be facts in a way that is misconstrued. And what this article basically talks about is, hey, like Latin America, which immigrants from Latin America constitute the largest percentage of immigrants to the United States. Um, and when people talk about demographic change, that's primarily who they're talking about. They're talking about Latin Americans and Mexicans. Um, I don't know if any like conservative who is like when they say demographic change, they might talk about Muslims maybe, but they're not talking about like the dude from like Japan, like that's not, they're not talking about that, or like the immigrant from like Russia. That's not who they mean when they say America, that demographic change is threatening America. They're talking about um, Hispanics, um, brown Hispanics specifically, because that is the only way they can noticeably differentiate between foreigners. And that's who they mean. So, but Hispanic, Latin America is very diverse. Latin America is it's funny. I said this to Fowler a second ago. It's hilarious to me because Latin America has the exact same colonial legacy as the United States. I mean, with the exception of a few Latin American countries that we helped coup in the 1980s. So, technically our fault, but every Latin American country is a democracy, either a parliamentary democracy or I think a constitutional based democracy. So the idea that Latin Americans are not going to be able to assimilate is very weird when you consider that like they also come from countries with histories of colonial conquest, and it was different the way that it was done. The Spanish and the Portuguese had a very different model of colonization than the English, but um, like I don't know. Is it really a problem? And is it really going to happen? Is it that's the big thing because whiteness and race, these concepts are not rooted in any sort of reality. I mean, they change based on context. And Benjamin Franklin proves that. Like Benjamin Franklin is, his letter. I wish I could blast his letter across every fucking news story in America because he essentially says like the only white people and the only people that are currently under demographic, that are currently undergoing demographic change are English people of Anglo-Saxon descent. Not even French people are considered white in his worldview, and he is one man, but that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that was the prevailing idea back in the day, that the English, the Anglo-Saxons, those of the British Isles, that they were the chiefly white people in the United States, and they were the people who had the most claim to America. And there are people who believe that today, but it's funny they'll never, they don't look at your ancestry and say, "Oh, your last name is Lafayette. Oh, well, you're not included in this." No, they don't do that.
Yeah, that's certainly interesting. I mean, if you go back into history, so much of history is repeating itself, I think. Like, it's very rare for there to be a new issue that is truly unique. I guess the only one I can think of off the top of my head is climate change. But, like, pretty much all the other issues, uh, immigrant fears, um, like fears of industrialization and how that will affect your life and your jobs, the economy, foreign affairs and foreign wars. Like these are, so like Mark Twain said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. It's just the
Exactly.
same kind of things over and over again.
Exactly. And you just have to be, the more educated you are, I think, about history, and I'll say this, to everybody listening, like, I really, really think one of the most important topics, especially in contemporary times, we can study is history. Because you see how many of these through lines are, you see how many of these anxieties, how they are repeating, like Fowler just said, and you see how so many of them, number one, like, I would agree that all of us, that America is thriving despite the large numbers of swarthy Germans that immigrated here in between, the mid 1700s to the 1900s. I'm I don't think anybody would disagree with that. I'm sure most of the people watching probably have German ancestry. You probably have an ancestor who is of German heritage. Um, you know, um, so by studying history and reading up on history, you get a good sense of, oh, okay, well, there's never been, like the way we classify demographics has changed, and I mean, just to be clear, as I said at the beginning of this, like if you're going to go by Benjamin Franklin's definition of like, white, um, then you're already fucked because like like you are like if we go by that definition, whites have been the minority since like the 1800s. Like we've already, you know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
it's only because we've reclassified what it means to be white that this is a problem, and I'm sure we'll reclassify it again, and the numbers will go up because many Hispanics, if you put a box in front of them that says white, they're going to check it off. Because Latin America is so diverse. Latin America is a you know a, a continent of all skin tones, all hair textures, all facial features. Um, of which of course it's the entirety of the New World, all the way from the tip of Alaska down to the tip of Argentina, is diverse. Uh, we've inherited that colonial legacy of settlements and population changes and whatever and whatever. So you're not going to escape it. Like it's not going to. The way we choose to classify it, though, is going to change. And I think the way, this idea that, oh, well, they're going to vote a certain way. No, I mean, the biggest threat to the Democratic Party currently is Hispanics because they've taken them for granted. They've assumed that Hispanics are always going to vote for Democrats, but that is shifting. Um, so if you're a Republican, you're in a pretty good spot, to be honest with you, because you might have a lot more in common with those Hispanic immigrants than you think. And maybe focus on that as opposed to something as arbitrary and dumb as skin color, you know? Um, is all I really got about that. I don't know if you want to add anything to it, Fowler.
No, I think you got it.
Yeah, I find it really interesting. And I think I find it interesting because I think the topic is really dangerous. I'm going to link that Atlantic article in the comments, but they lay it out in a way that's a lot more sort of succinct than I have. Because they talk about how essentially like it's a perception game, is what it is. And when you start to tell people, oh, hey, you're going to be a minority, when that's not even really going to be the case, most likely. I mean, it depends on how you classify things. Um, Immigrants from Latin America have the highest rate of intermarriage of any group of people. So and also, this is a fun fact that I learned. Um, Up until the 1950s, going back to Benjamin Franklin's concern about, you know, German Americans not assimilating. Up until the 1950s, there were still places in America where you could find German, go into schools and they were singing the Star Spangled Banner, the national anthem in German. There were entire German settlements across the West that didn't actually fully, really, I guess, quote unquote, integrate until World War One. They still participated in the economy. They still participated in, democracy. They elected their officials. They followed the rule of law. Um, Immigrants today are actually integrating faster than any demographic.
Well,
You
it
know,
helps that the mass media as a
yeah,
system
exactly.
pulls
Well,
everyone in.
we have technology now, so like you, by virtue of that, you are going to assimilate and integrate faster than any other group ever has. So, um, the fears are real. I don't want to ever dis. I think it's important that we acknowledge that the anxieties do exist, and we find ways to try to offset those anxieties. Um, but at the same time, you have to ask yourself, okay, how much of this is smokescreen? How much of this is conspiracy? Because the conspiracy is that it's done deliberately by a group of people, and that's not real. Um, how much of this is smokescreens being used by politicians to rile up people to vote for them? Hint, hint, wink, wink, Trump. You go into Trump Tower in New York City, it's all Hispanics, I'm telling you. He's got Hispanics cleaning his toilets. He's got Mexicans fucking doing everything for him. Um, so And I think we all knew that because he's a grade A fucking hypocrite. But how much of this shit is um smokescreen. Definitely think our immigration system needs to be fixed. I don't think anybody disagrees with that, but the well has been poisoned so much at this point that I don't think there's ever going to be or at least within our lifetime, probably going to be a solution. Um, the immigration debate has been so Trump poisoned the well to the to a point that I don't even know. I don't know if you agree with that, Fowler, but
I guess he has in his own way. It's a very particular thing, I think.
yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's particular, and I think like there could have been a reasonable discussion about border security and reforming our immigration laws, um, and helping, people, in South America that are trying to come here. But I think the discourse is so toxic that I don't even know, you know.
Well, the immigrant fear has always been a way to pull racial politics into things. Like there
Absolutely.
are people who are genuinely afraid, but it's always been a dog whistle for the worst kinds of people, which I
It's the
think
most
makes it
useful
hard.
dog whistle too. Anxieties over demographic change. It's an incredibly easy thing. I think is the problem. You know, it's very
Yeah,
easy to get people afraid of people that they don't know. And people that they're unfamiliar with. Um, so if you're a politician and you want to get votes, all you got to do is point to a group of people and say, "Hey, these people are dangerous," and then you show a couple of images. You go on social media and post a bunch of videos of people getting beat up, even though there's probably just the same amount of videos of the reverse happening, and then you just post those and then say, "Hey, look, I'm right." It's
yeah.
so easy. It's one of the easiest things you can do. Um, Nobody wants to talk about the economy. Fucking economics is boring as fuck. But being afraid of Mexicans, that's you can do that. Your brain, it's an easy thing to do. I don't understand macroeconomics, so
Very few people do.
yeah, shit's boring as hell. Um, but yeah, so I think I talked a lot. Fowler, you need to talk more because I talked a lot.
Well, this is more your thing than mine. I'm not as interested in the demographic debate. Like I just don't find it particularly interesting, and especially because like I think like I've lived in some very urban, very diverse areas. So like I've already lived through what um, demographic people are afraid of, and it was fine. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's one of those things that has to be addressed. You know what I mean? Like I'm you know, I think that it's interesting because I think I love history. So of course, if you guys get the chance, I mean, just go on the Louisiana Creole Wikipedia page and read, and you're going to be blown away. You're going to be like, "What the fuck? This is a portion of American history that I never knew about." Um, so I think that's interesting, and then I also think it is worth addressing because I think it's unfortunately it's going to continue to be something that's used by politicians to drive wedges between us, and we don't need that. We don't. Uh, you know, Not to close out on a somber note, but speaking of, you mentioned climate change. The COP28 summit was today, and I think it was in the UAE. And essentially, the conclusion was that, and this is going to be very morbid, but that we are going to overshoot our goals, meaning that we are going to reach that 1.2 heating threshold. We have failed. Essentially, was the consensus. We have failed at properly lowering our carbon emissions enough to stop um, the melting of the ice caps and the flooding and the devastation that is going to happen. And right now, all we can do is mitigation and potentially trying to lower our carbon uh, so that we can mitigate as many of those effects as possible. And that's going to require everybody to work together. So I am very, very skeptical of politics that engages in human demonization. Uh, you know, um, because it helps nobody. You know, um, it helps nobody. At the end of the day, you know. So I'm gonna let you close out, Fowler, because I've been running my mouth for fucking forever.
Um, I was gonna try and have a call to the audience, but I feel like we shouldn't call them to seek out foreigners and you know isolate
Stick
them.
out foreigners and do what? Finish the sentence, Fowler.
uh, we are.
Finish the sentence.
What the fuck is it called? Week old beans. There it is.
We are
Yeah,
week old beans. Yeah,
we
us
are
at
week
week
old
old beans,
beans.
the most viewed podcast on YouTube. Uh, what is the call to action to the viewers?
I don't think there's a call to action. Do
Well,
not demonize people for.
yeah,
Uh,
don't be an asshole. That's the call to action. Be less of a piece of shit. Not saying that you are. I'm just saying don't be a piece of shit because that's mean. You don't want to do that.
yeah, exactly.
And also eat vegetables and go for a walk. Do that too.
All right, sounds good.
Oh, you think I'm talking to you? Yeah, eat your fruits and veggies and go for a walk. That'll also help too. It'll make you feel better. But yeah, this is week old beans. Y'all have a good one. Uh, Happy Christmas, Thanksgiving, and we will see y'all in the next video.